Hello, you are watching another episode of our game tutorial, and in this episode we will create the simple inventory system. After this episode we will be able to pick up the apple and we will see them in the inventory together with the count of the apples. At first we have to import the frames images for our inventory, so in the content folder create a new folder called inventory, and in this inventory folder create new folder called sprites. Open that folder and click the import button and choose one of the frames you like and import them to the Unreal Engine. Then right click on the frame and hit the sprite actions and apply paper 3 texture settings, and again sprite actions and extract sprites because you want to get particular frames from this image. The grid size for this frame is 64 by 64 pixels, so use that and hit the extract button to extract the sprites. We will create the inventory user interface and we will focus on the inventory slot. By that I mean that box where you can see the apple when you pick it up. So let's right click in the inventory folder and find the widget blueprint and click it, and in the next menu we will select the user widget and hit the select button. We can name the newly created widget as WB inventory slot. Let's open it and we can start adding first components there. In the search box type the size to find the size box and drag and drop it to the inventory slot in the down part of the screen. The size box allows us to set the size of whatever we add into the size box. In our case, we want the inventory slot to be a square of a size 128 pixels. And to set it, simply click on the size box and on the right side click on the width override and set it to 128, and also to weight override and set it also to 128. We also want to change the view from the fill screen to the desired on screen to actually see the size box at proper size. Now zoom in to our square and we can add the button component because the player should be able to click on the inventory slot and use the item there. Again, drag and drop this button component into the size box. We want the button to be transparent because we will add another image into the button later, so let's click on it and change the background color alpha channel to 0. We can also rename the button and remove the number suffix from it. Inside the button we want to show 3 things. The first one will be the frame image, the second one is the image of the item which is in the slot, and the third one is a text showing how many items are there. Those components will overlap with each other, so we have to use overlay for that. So search for the overlay and add it into the button. If you click on the overlay, you can see that it is very small while we want it to fill in the button completely. To do that, find the horizontal alignment on the right menu and click the fill horizontally, and for the vertical alignment, click the fill vertically. You can see that there is still some padding on the left and right side from the overlay. Let's search for padding on the right menu and set it to 0. We have to do the same for the button, so let's click on the button component and in the normal padding, let's set it to 0, and also in the pressed padding, let's set it to 0. Now the overlay completely fills in the button and we can continue adding the image component for our frame. So let's search for the image and drag and drop it to the overlay. This image will show the frame, so let's rename it to frame to keep things organized. We also want this image to fill in the button, so let's remove the padding filter and go to the slot and set the horizontal alignment and vertical alignment to fill option. In the brush section, search for the image and set the image to our frame. You can choose whatever frame you want. And as usual, the link to the frames will be in the description of the video. Now we can add another image which will be used for the item which is in the inventory slot. So we will rename it to item. We also want this image to fill in the button, but we want to keep some padding there so the frame is visible. So use the horizontal alignment and vertical alignment and set it to fill. But we will find the padding again in the search menu and change it. We have to find the right value so the frame is still visible, but the item image is not too small. For me the number 25 seems okay. The last thing we want to add there is the text component, so search for the text component and drag and drop it to the overlay And we will use this component to show the quantity of the items in the inventory slot. So let's call it quantity. By default, the text components are not treated as a variable, so we wouldn't be able to change them from the blueprint. But in the future, we want to change it. We want to set the quantity from the code. So we have to click the is variable checkbox on the right menu. Before doing anything else, let's get better example for the text content. So in the content section, find the text and set it to 5, which is a number of quantity we can use as an example. Now we want to move this text down to the bottom right part of the slot. So let's open the slot section and set the horizontal alignment to right and vertical alignment to bottom. And we also want to change the padding, right padding and bottom padding, so the text is not colliding with the frame. For me, the values 15 and 7 worked well. And now we have our inventory slot done. Now it's time to combine multiple inventory slots into the inventory. So let's go back to the inventory folder, and there we will right click and add new widget blueprint. And in that dialog, we will choose user widget as before and click select. We will name this widget WB inventory. And we can open it and start adding first components. First one to add is the canvas panel, and we are adding it because we will use its anchor feature. You will learn about that later. So drag and drop it to the inventory. Next widget is an overlay, so let's search for the overlay and drag and drop it to the canvas panel. Now click on the overlay and we will shortly talk about anchor. Anchors are important if we want to put something into specific part of the screen, for example to the center of a screen or to the right corner. Without the anchor, we could probably drag and drop the widget to the center of the screen, and this would set its position X and position Y coordinates. But the issue with this is that this screen has different resolution on different devices, and therefore also the position X and position Y of the center of a screen is different. We therefore need a way how to compute the center of a screen no matter what the resolution is. And this is what the anchor allows us. We want to show the inventory at the center bottom part of the screen, so in the anchors, choose that location. We can see that the anchor moved to that location, and also the position X and position Y of our overlay changed. Its position is relative to the anchor location. We want to show this overlay exactly where the anchor is, so change the position X and Y to 0. We also want to center the overlay, so the center of the overlay is in the center of the anchor. So let's change its alignment to 0.5 in both X and Y, and this will center the overlay. It should also be a little bit more up, so the inventory is not on the bottom side of the screen, but a little bit above the bottom side of the screen. So let's change its position X until we are satisfied with that. We also want to change its size Y to 128 pixels because that's the size of our inventory slot. For the size X, we will do some computations. So we will have 8 inventory slots, each is 128 pixels wide, so that's 1024 pixels. And we will also have 7 gaps between those slots, each for 10 pixels. So it's like 7 multiply 10. And altogether it's 1094 pixels. And now we can try to resize the screen to actually see if the anchor works correctly and if the overlay is always at the right location. And we see that it works as expected. We can now switch it back to the 9-inch monitor. So that's all for the overlay, and we can add horizontal box. We will use it to align the inventory slot widgets horizontally in the overlay. So let's drag and drop it and move it to the overlay. Next, we can search for the inventory slot we created earlier and also drag and drop it to the horizontal box. And then we can add another one, and for this another one we will click on it and search for the padding, and we will add that left padding and set it to 10 pixels. We can now copy and paste this second inventory slot with padding 6 times, and that way we will get 8 inventory slots in the inventory. Last thing to do here is to rename the horizontal box to slots, and setting that is variable checkbox there, so we can access this horizontal box from the blueprints later. We are done with the inventory widget, and now it's time to show it in the game. In the inventory folder, we will create new blueprint class, and the type will be the actor component. We can name it BPC inventory, like blueprint component inventory. The blueprint components can be added to another blueprints to extend them in similar way as we add, for example, flipbook there. So let's open our top-down character, and in that left menu we can click the add button and find our newly created blueprint component inventory and add it there. We can now open the inventory component and start adding code there to actually show the inventory on the screen. We can remove the event tick because we don't need it, and from the event begin play we will create new action and search for the create widget. We want to create the inventory widget here, so in the class find our inventory widget and select it. And for the owning player we can use the get player controller action. We will use this inventory widget a lot, so we will store it to the variable. So take the return value and use the promote to variable action and name the variable as inventory. Then we want to show the inventory widget on the screen, so take the inventory variable and call its add to viewport action, and we should be done here. And if we hit the compile button and play the game now, we should see the inventory on the screen. Now we will start implementing the inventory logic, but we will at first discuss it a little bit on the blackboard. In our inventory widget, we have 8 widget slots, and to represent them in the inventory component, we will use array of sitem objects, and we will have 8 of them. In the inventory component, we will have 3 functions, and the first one will be InitializeInventory. In this function, we will create the array of sitems, so we will iterate over the widget slots, and for each of them, we will create one empty sitem in the array. Next function will be the RefreshInventory, and in this function we will update each widget slot according to the sitems from that array. We will mainly update the image and the quantity text. Last function will be the AddToInventory function, which will be used to add new sitem to the array. In this function we will go through the array to find some free space there and store the sitem in this free space. So let's go to the inventory component and start implementing all of that. At first we have to create the items array, so create new variable, call it items, and set the type to sitem. Because it's array, on the right side we have to choose the variable type and choose the array. Now we will work on the InitializeInventory function, so let's add it by clicking the add function and naming it InitializeInventory. We want to iterate over the inventory slot widgets, so let's get the inventory, and from the inventory let's get the slots box, and this box contains all those inventory slot widgets. We will get all of them as an array by using the getAllChildren action. And now we will use the for each loop to iterate over each inventory slot widget in that array. The for each loop calls the loop body repeatedly with array element and array index from the array, and when it's finished, it calls the completed. For each inventory slot widget in that array, we want to call the make as item to create new item and store it in the array. So let's use the make as item action. We can keep all the input variables empty, and that will mean that the slot is 3. Now we just have to get the items array and call its add action to really add the newly created sitem to the array. We can also move things around to make them nice and connect the sitem to the add action and really call the add action. So that's all for this function, and we can now go to the event begin play, and there before the add to viewport we have to call our newly created InitializeInventory action. And that way we will get the array ready just when the game starts. Now we can add the RefreshInventory function, which will update the inventory slot widgets according to the array. So at first we have to get the items array there and call its for each loop action to iterate over this array. We will use this split struct bin feature on the array element to show its content. For each item from this array, we want to find out the matching inventory slot widget. So let's get the inventory variable and get its slots object, which is our horizontal box. And from this slots objects, we will use the get child at action to actually get the slot with the same index as the index in the array. The get child at action returns the widget object, but we know that it's actually the inventory slot widget, so we can cast it to the inventory slot to be able to access all its variables. Now we have to detect whether there is something in the slot or if it's empty, and for that we will use the name variable from the sitem, and we will simply call its isEmpty function to detect that. You can spend some time to make the lines nicer, but usually it's like better to do that once you are sure that the code is working. Anyway, we have to create the branch action from the isEmpty condition, so we can actually write some code when the item is empty or when it's not empty. And because we will use the inventory slot widget a lot in the next part of the code, we will promote it to local variable by dragging it and running the promote to local variable action, and we can name the variable as a slot. Local variables are special in a way that you can use them only in the single function. Now when this branch is true, it means that the inventory slot is empty and we want to reset the item image in the slot. So let's get the slot variable, and from there we will get the item image. In the item image, we want to call the set brush action, which is actually the way how to set some image there. Now it's time to create the empty brush, so we can actually set it as a brush there, and this will result in empty image in the inventory slot. So use the make brush from material action. As a material, you can use the translucent unlit sprite material, and then you can connect this return value to the brush for the set brush action. So now we have a code to reset the image when the branch is true, and we also have to connect that to the true part of the branch. We can save some time by copy pasting the set brush part of the code, because we will use the same code in the false part of the branch action when there is actually something in the inventory slot. Don't forget to connect this to the false part of the branch, and the difference between this false and true part is that in the false part we actually have something in the inventory slot, and therefore we will show real flipbook. So drag a line from the flipbook and search for the get sprite at frame action. We are using this action because the flipbook is animation and the brush is static image, so we have to get the first frame of the animation to actually show it as an image. Now we can simply use the return value of the get sprite at frame and call its make brush from sprite action, and connect the return value of this action to the set brush in brush variable. And that should be all we need here for now. We have to go back to the event begin play and call this newly created RefreshInventory right after the InitializeInventory function. So we actually call the code we have just created. And if you run the game now, you can see that the white boxes in the inventory are gone, and that means that we properly set the empty image there in the RefreshInventory function. Now we can go back to the inventory component and add the last AddToInventory function. There will be one input variable, and we will call it item_to_add, and the type of this variable will be structure as item, and this will be the item we want to add to the inventory. The first thing we have to do is to iterate over all the items in the items array and find out some free space there where we can add the item_to_add. So we have to get the items array and call its for each loop action. And for the array element, use the split struct pin to get the content of that as item structure. To find out if the structure is occupied, we can use the name variable and check if it's empty. And if it's empty, it means that there is a free space there, and we can use this structure to store the item into the inventory. So we added branch and isEmpty action there. Now in the true part of this branch, we want to replace the current asItem structure in the array with the item_to_add. And because we will use the item to add a lot in this function, we will again store it in the local variable. So add the promote to local variable action, name the variable as item, and call it right after the AddToInventory function starts. We can go back to the true part of a branch and get the item and also get the items array. And we will call the setArrayLm function to replace the current structure in the array with the item to add. Don't forget to actually call the setArrayLm by connecting the while line to the true part of a branch. And we also have to set the index input value to array index. That actually defines which item in the array we are replacing. So now we have the item to add stored in the array, but to actually show it in the inventory widget, we have to call the RefreshInventory function. So all those inventory slot widgets are refreshed and our item is visible there. And we also have to add the return node here to actually stop the for each loop, because otherwise the for each loop would iterate over the next and next item in that array, and it would add the item to add to all those free items. And this is not what we want. We want the for each loop to add the item just once and return from that function. So we have the inventory component stored in the top-down character blueprint, and we also have the item actions pick up blueprint, which should be called when the user wants to pick up that item. And we have to combine these two things together. So let's start by creating the blueprint interface next to the top-down character. So right-click there, choose the blueprint interface, and name it I with inventory. And this will be our interface for any character which has some inventory. We will so far have just the single function there, which will be called AddToInventory. And this function will have single input. This will be our item to add. And the type of that input will be the S item structure. Now let's go back to the top-down character. And here in the class settings, we have to add this inventory there. So in the implemented interfaces, click on the add button and search for the I with inventory and add it there. And in the interfaces section on the left side, you will see the add to inventory function. So double click it to add the event add to inventory. And from here, we will simply call our add to inventory function from the inventory component. We also have to connect the item to add variables together from those two actions. Now we have to go to the item actions pickup to actually call this add to inventory interface function from there. So currently we are just destroying the item when the user interacts with it, but we want to actually add it to the inventory before that. So let's drag the line from the owner and find our add to inventory function from the I with inventory interface and call it. We also have to set the item to add structure, and to get it from the item, which is actually the base item object, we have to call its get item action, and the result is the item structure representing that base item in the game world. So if we run the game right now, we should be able to pick up the apple and it should disappear from the game and appear in our inventory. But we have to fix one situation when the inventory is full. Let's see what happens in this case. To test it, we will create 9 copies of the apple. So if we run the game now and start collecting the apples, things will work correctly, but the last apple, which should not fit in the inventory, disappears from the game, but it's also not in the inventory, and that's a bug we have to fix. To fix that, we have to go to our inventory component and get to the add to inventory function, and we will focus on this completed for each loop part. What happens here is that in this for each loop we are trying to find out the empty space in the array, but there is actually no empty space. So the for each loop finishes and calls the completed part, but we are not doing anything there. So the result is that the item is not added into the array, but it is later removed from the game when we call destroy actor in the item actions pickup. To fix that, we have to somehow tell the item actions pickup that we were not able to add this item into the inventory, and therefore it should not be removed from the game. And we will use the output variable in the add to inventory function to do that. So let's click on the AddToInventory function in the left menu, and in the right menu add the new output variable, call it item edit, and the type will be boolean, and it will be simply true when we were able to add the item into the inventory. Now let's go to the end of our function, and there is a return node, and we have to check the item edit there because in this case we were able to add the item to the inventory. And in the completed part of the for each loop, we will add a new return node, but we will keep the item edit unchecked, meaning that we were not able to add this item right now. Now we need to propagate this item edit boolean from the inventory component to the item actions pickup, and because these two things communicate using the interface, we have to edit the interface at first. So let's open the interface and add new output to the AddToInventory function, and we will call it item edit. We also have to set the type of the variable to boolean if it's not set automatically. Now you can click the compile button, and we will open the top-down character to continue there. You can see that there is an error here. Don't be afraid of that. It's simply caused by the fact that we added output to our interface, and events cannot have outputs. So we simply remove the event and hit the compile button to remove the error. We can use the Ctrl X to cut the code, and in the interface section we will recreate the AddToInventory interface function, and now it will not do the event, but it will open the real function with return a node. We can now paste the code there back and connect the white lines, and also connect the item to add, and also the item edit output variable. We have to continue in the item action pickup blueprint, and you can see that the AddToInventory has now the item edit output variable. So we will create branch from this variable, and we will destroy the actor only if the item has been added, so only in the true part of that branch. And this ensures we are not destroying something which was not added to the inventory. So we can now run the game and again collect all those 8 apples, and if we try to collect the 9th one, it should stay there, and we see that it works as expected. The last missing feature is grouping of the apples in the single inventory slot, and also write quantity numbers. We have to store the quantity somewhere, and the best place for that is our asItem structure. So let's open it and add new variable there. We can call it quantity, and the type of this variable will be integer. In the game view, we don't need that many apples now, so we can remove those extra apples, and we can just keep 3 of them there. We changed the asItem structure, so therefore we have to open the base item and recompile it, so the newly created quantity variable appears in the item section of each game object. And for each game object we have to set the quantity. For apples it's number 1 because we just have single apple there, but you can imagine that if you have some golden coins there, it can be like 10 for 10 golden coins and so on. Now we will go back to our inventory component, and we will edit the RefreshInventory function. What we want to do here is to update the quantity text according to the quantity variable in the asItem structure. The test widget is stored in that inventory widget slot, which we have stored in the slot variable. So let's get that slot variable and get the quantity widget from it. And in the quantity we have to set the text there. So use the set text action and search for the for each loop, and drag the quantity element and connect it to the text input variable of the set text action. The Unreal will automatically convert the text, the integer to text. So we just have to move the actions around and clean up the lines. We also have to call this set action. So let's draw the white lines from the both set brush actions to the set actions. So in both cases we run the set text action. Now you can compile the code and run the game, and you can see that the 5 number is not there anymore. We have the zeros there, which is more correct. But still it would be nice to don't have any number there if the inventory slot is empty. To do that, we will check if quantity equals 0, and if it does, we will set the empty string, otherwise we will use our current code to set the integer. So let's disconnect the quantity from the toText action and add the equal operator. Now we will add the branch action and call it instead of our setText action. Our current code should be called in the false part of that branch because that means there is some item with quantity. And we also have to connect the quantity to the text action. Now we will copy paste the setText action and place it above the current setText action. And we will keep the text empty, which means that there will be no text, and simply connect it to the true part of the branch. And that's all in this function, so we can hit the compile button and try running the game, and you can see that there is no number now, but if we take some item, the number 1 appears. Now we will focus on that AddToInventory function, and we will implement the item grouping there. We will be using that sItem from the for each loop a lot, so let's disconnect the name from it, so we can right click on some element and hit the recombine struct pin to get the sItem struct back there. We will now use the promote to local variable, so we can use this struct in the code without all those lines floating around. And we can name this variable current item. Let's make some space there and connect the set action from the loop body, so it's repeated on every loop iteration. Now we will do the same for the current index variable, so let's promote it to the local variable and connect it between the current set action and the branch action. And we can also name the variable as current index. We can remove this extra current index line we have left there, and now we will have to set the name back to the isEmpty action. So get the current item and call its break sItem action and connect the name to the isEmpty input variable. And if you click on the break sItem, you can click on the hide unconnected pins, which will just show the connected name there, and this saves us some space here in the blueprint. All the other code changes in this function will be done in the false part of this branch. To remind you what's going on here, in that for each loop we are iterating over all the inventory slots and we are finding one which is empty. And if it's not empty, the false part of that branch is executed, and what we want to achieve there is to check whether there is already the item with the same name there, and if there is, we want to increase its quantity. So let's add new branch action there to check whether the current item has the same name as an item we want to add to the inventory. We will use the getCurrentItem and the break sItem to actually get the name of the current item we are just iterating over. We can hide all the pins except of the name, and we will do the same for the item we want to add to the inventory. So get that item and run the break sItem action to get the name, and we will again hide everything except of the name. Next we have to compare if these two names equals, so drag the line from one of them and run the equal exactly action. Then connect the second name variable to this equal block, and we can connect this equal result to the branch condition. Now when this condition is true, we can be sure that we have found out the inventory slot with the same item, and we just have to sum the quantities and store them in the new item. So let's get the current item and run the break sItem action, and we will hide all the pins except of the quantity. We will do the same thing for the item, which is actually the item we want to add to the inventory. And so get the item and run the break sItem and hide everything except the quantity field. Now we want to add these two quantities together, so add the add function and connect the quantities to inputs to this action. Then we want to get the current item because we want to update the quantity there to the new value. To do that, we need to use the setMembers in sItem action, and in the pins we have to check the quantity because that's the value we want to update. Don't forget to actually call the setMembers in sItem from the true part of the branch. And we also have to connect the add function output to the setMembers in sItem quantity input. Then we also have to call the setArray element, so we actually update the sItem structure in the array to the new sItem we have just created here. So let's connect the setMembers and sItem struct output to the item input of the setArray element. I also just noticed that we forgot to connect the index to the setArray element. So let's get the current index and connect it to the index. And we probably did the same mistake back then in the previous setArray element. So let's correct it and also connect the index there. We also have to call the setArray element after the setMembers in sItem. And we also have to call the RefreshInventory and return node. Otherwise, we would just change the array, but we will never change the inventory slot widgets according to array. And that's all for this function. So we can compile and try it out. And if we run the demo and start taking the apples, you can see that the number of apples updates properly. So we are done here. So thanks for watching. This is all for this episode. And in the next one, we will add the drag and drop feature. So we will be able to move the items from one item slot to another and also drop it back to the game and again, like pick it up. So again, thanks for watching. Please subscribe and see you next time.